Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow, as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften, like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. Some fear doesn't feel like panic. It feels like standing still with a packed bag. Like you're ready to move, but your mind keeps asking the same question in different words. Where is this going? It was early morning, still dark enough that streetlights felt like the main source of sky. A person stood at a bus stop with a small suitcase and a paper cup of coffee that was already cooling down. The air had that clean, slightly metallic feeling it gets before sunrise. Quiet, but not empty. The bus shelter had a bench, a scratched-up route map, and a dim light that buzzed softly. A plastic ad panel clicked once in the wind, then settled. Nothing dramatic, just the small sounds of a city waking up slowly. They weren't moving far, not across the country, not a big cinematic escape. Just a change, an apartment ending a job, shifting a plan, rewriting itself. The kind of life transition that looks normal on paper, but feels huge inside the body. Uncertainty was sitting in the chest like a weight. They looked down at the suitcase. It wasn't heavy. It was the regular kind of heavy. Clothes, a laptop, a few things they didn't want to leave behind. The real weight was something else, the not knowing. The mind kept running the same loop. What if this is the wrong direction? What if I regret it? What if the wind takes me somewhere I don't like? They took a sip of coffee. Lukewarm now. Bitter. Real. It grounded them in the simplest way. Taste, warmth, breath. A car passed, tires making a soft hiss on the road. Then the street went quiet again. A signal at the intersection changed colors with a small click, even though no one was crossing. They stared at that light for a second and thought, not for the first time, how many things keep changing without asking if we're ready. They reached into their pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. Grocery store a few days ago. It had been in there without reason. They unfolded it, then folded it again, the paper thin and soft from being handled too much. A tiny, pointless ritual. Still, it helped. Fear often looks for something to hold. If there's nothing obvious, it grabs whatever is nearby. Their phone buzzed once some notification they didn't check. Not because they were being disciplined, but because they didn't want more input. Their mind already had enough noise. The wind picked up slightly, pushing at the edge of their jacket. Not hard, just present. It moved a dry leaf across the sidewalk, scraping lightly, then carried it into the gutter. The leaf didn't fight the wind. It didn't decide where to go. It just moved. They watched it and felt a strange mix of envy and relief. Envy because surrender looks simple from the outside. Relief because the leaf wasn't suffering about it. That's when a different image came, one they'd heard somewhere years ago and forgot until now. A seed carried by wind. A seed doesn't know where it will land. It doesn't get to pick the weather. It doesn't demand certainty before moving. And still, somehow, life keeps using seeds. The thought didn't turn into a lesson. It was more like a quiet correction, a reminder that not knowing is not the same as failing. They looked down at their hands, the fingers around the coffee cup, slightly tense, the knuckles a little pale. They softened their grip without thinking too hard about it. The cup didn't drop. The world didn't collapse. Nothing bad happened when they stopped clenching. That felt like information. A bus appeared far down the road, headlights small at first, then larger. The engine sound arrived a moment later, low and steady. It wasn't rushing. It was just coming. Their stomach tightened in a quick, familiar way. The mind tried to sprint ahead again. Once you get on, it's real. Once you move, you can't unmove. They almost laughed at how dramatic that sounded inside their own head. It was a bus, not a cliff. Still, the body treats unknowns seriously. That's what it does. The bus slowed as it approached brakes, releasing with a soft sigh. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. Warm air spilled out, smelling faintly like vinyl seats and someone's peppermint gum. The driver didn't look at them in any meaningful way. Just a quick glance that said, "Getting on or not?" They hesitated for half a second. Fear loves half seconds. It builds whole stories in them. But then they stepped forward, lifted the suitcase, and walked up. The first step onto the bus felt different than they expected. Not like a leap, not like a point of no return. Just a step, rubber floor, slight bounce, ordinary. They paid, moved down the aisle, and found a seat by the window. The suitcase rested against their shin. The coffee cup warmed their palm again. The bus pulled away from the curb, smooth and predictable. Outside the bus stop, slid backward and disappeared. For a moment, their mind waited for regret to crash in like a wave. It didn't. What came instead was something quieter. the recognition that movement can happen without certainty, that you can be afraid and still go, that you cannot know and still take the next step. The city drifted past the window in soft early morning shapes. Closed storefronts, empty sidewalks, the occasional person walking a dog like it was any other day. The wind outside continued doing what wind does, moving leaves, shifting branches, carrying whatever it could carry. Inside, the bus kept going 1 block at a time, and for now, that was enough. The bus moved through the city with an unhurried confidence, stopping when it needed to, starting again without drama. Each stop felt like a small punctuation mark, not an interruption. Doors opening, doors closing, people getting on and off, each carrying their own reasons, their own quiet weight. They watched reflections slide across the window, streetlights, signs, the pale hint of morning beginning to dilute the dark. The glass turned everything softer, less defined, as if the world itself didn't want to be too clear yet. That felt appropriate. Their bodies slowly adjusted to the motion. The tightness in the stomach loosened. The shoulders dropped a little. The fear didn't vanish, but it settled into something more manageable, like background weather instead of a warning siren. They noticed how the bus didn't announce where it was going all at once. No full map laid out in front of them. Just the next stop. Then the next. Enough information to keep moving. That was all it offered. And somehow, that was enough. Fear had been insisting on a full picture, on guarantees, on knowing how this choice would look in hindsight before it was allowed to happen. But life wasn't cooperating with that demand. It never really does. A person a few rows ahead shifted in their seat, adjusting a backpack. Someone else scrolled on a phone, face lit briefly, then dim again. Ordinary movements, ordinary mornings unfolding alongside theirs. They realized something quietly then. They weren't alone in not knowing. Everyone on this bus was being carried somewhere without full certainty. Even the driver didn't know every detail of every passenger's destination. They just followed the route one stretch at a time. That thought eased something deep in the chest. The seed image returned not as poetry, but as practicality. A seed doesn't carry a plan. It carries potential. What happens next depends on where it lands, what it meets, what conditions surround it. The wind doesn't promise outcomes. It offers movement. They rested their head lightly against the window, feeling the cool glass through the fabric of their hood. The vibration of the bus hummed through their body, steady and grounding. Motion has a way of calming fear when thought cannot. Outside, the sky began to change color, not dramatically. Just a gradual thinning of darkness, like a held breath being released. They thought about how much energy had been spent trying to choose perfectly, trying to avoid mistakes before they could happen, trying to protect themselves from future regret. But regret, they realized, isn't always born from moving. Sometimes it comes from staying still too long, waiting for clarity that never arrives. The bus turned onto a longer road, picking up speed slightly. Buildings gave way to wider spaces, fewer lights, more sky. They felt a small flicker of excitement underneath the fear. Not the loud kind, just a quiet curiosity, a sense of something is shifting, without needing to name what. Fear noticed it too and hesitated. It didn't know how to argue with curiosity. It thrives on certainty, not openness. They took another sip of coffee. Cold now, not great, still grounding. The cup was almost empty anyway. They set it down carefully between their feet. Letting go even of small things felt easier in motion. The bus slowed again, pulling up to another stop. Doors opened. A person got off. The bus didn't seem to mind. It didn't cling. It didn't question whether this was the right moment. It simply continued. They watched the door close and felt something click into place, not as a conclusion, but as permission. Permission to not know everything. Permission to arrive later than expected. Permission to trust that movement itself is information. The fear was still there, faint but familiar. It would probably show up again at some point, dressed in new questions, new concerns. That was fine. They didn't need to defeat it. They just needed to keep going when going was what life asked for. Outside, the city fully began to wake. A bakery light flicked on. A jogger crossed the street. Somewhere, a radio played softly through an open window. Life was already in motion, indifferent to their doubts, generous in its continuation. They shifted in their seat, feeling the suitcase press lightly against their leg. A reminder of what they carried. Not too much, just enough. The bus rolled forward, carrying them and everyone else toward places that didn't yet exist in this moment. A seed doesn't know the future. It knows how to move when the wind arrives. And this morning, that was enough. The day didn't start badly. In fact, it started almost pleasantly, the kind of morning where nothing stands out enough to be remembered later. Coffee tasted normal. Traffic moved without drama. The office lights flicked on, one by one, soft and routine like they always did. It was the middle of the afternoon when it happened. She was sitting at her desk, sorting through emails with the quiet focus that comes from repetition, when a message popped up that made her pause. It wasn't long. It wasn't loud. Just a few sentences that carried a tone she knew too well. Short, dismissive, sharp around the edges. She read it once, then again, feeling something tighten just below her ribs. The words themselves weren't cruel, but they landed in a place already tired. A place that had been holding up all day without complaint. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she stared at the screen, letting the irritation spread slowly, like a stain soaking through fabric. The room felt warmer, her shoulders lifted without her noticing. Somewhere nearby, a printer hummed steady and unaware. By the time the workday ended, the message had grown larger in her mind than it deserved. It followed her to the break room, where she opened the fridge to grab her lunch container now meant for dinner. She set it on the counter and opened the lid. Inside was a small assortment of fruit she had packed that morning. Apples sliced and neat, the kind of simple choice she made when she wanted to feel like she was taking care of herself. One piece caught her eye immediately. It was bruised, soft around the edge, slightly darker than the rest. She frowned, feeling the irritation from earlier rise again, as if the apple had personally joined in. It was ridiculous, she knew that, but her mood was already tilted, and small things tipped easily when the balance was off. She picked up the bruised slice between her fingers and turned it slowly, inspecting it from every angle. The rest of the apples looked fine, fresh, crisp. But this one stood out so clearly that it pulled all her attention toward it, like it was the only thing in the container. She had a sudden vivid thought. This one piece could ruin the whole thing. Not because it actually would, but because she was now focused on it. Because her mind had already decided that the flaw mattered more than everything else around it. She set the slice down and leaned against the counter arms, crossed loosely over her chest. The fridge door remained open, humming quietly, bathing the kitchen in white light. That's when it clicked. The message. The tone. The way her whole afternoon had shifted because of one small moment. It felt exactly the same. One bruised interaction sitting in the middle of an otherwise ordinary day, drawing her attention again and again, inviting her to toss out the whole thing just to be done with it. She closed the fridge and picked up the container, carrying it to the table by the window. Outside, the sky was starting to dim, the color softening as evening settled in. She sat down and looked at the apples again. Nothing had changed. The bruised one was still there. So were the others. She realized how easily she could let that one slice decide everything. She could eat it while resenting it. She could throw the entire container away. She could let the irritation from one moment poison the quiet satisfaction of finally being done with the day. It would be so easy. That was the part that bothered her most. She reached in, picked up the bruised apple, and set it aside on a napkin. The movement was calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial in its simplicity. Then she picked up a fresh slice and took a bite. The crunch was loud in the quiet room. Clean. Sharp in a good way. She chewed slowly, paying attention to the taste, the texture, the way her jaw moved without tension when she wasn't replaying anything in her head. The irritation didn't vanish. It lingered nearby like a sound in the next room, but it no longer filled the space. As she ate, she noticed how her breathing deepened, how the tightness in her chest softened just a little. The rest of the apples didn't need defending. They were fine on their own. She didn't excuse the message. She didn't justify the tone. She simply stopped letting it decide the shape of her evening. By the time she finished, the container was nearly empty, save for the bruised slice resting off to the side, no longer in the center of her attention. She stood up, rinsed the container, and dried it carefully before placing it back in her bag. The workday was still what it was. The message still existed. But something important had shifted. She had chosen not to let one small bitterness spoil everything else that was still good. And for the first time since reading that email, her shoulders finally relaxed. When she left the office, the sky had already slipped into that quiet blue that only appears at the edge of evening. The building emptied slowly, people moving past one another without much conversation, each carrying their own version of the day home. As she walked to her car, the message tried to return, not as words this time, but as a familiar tightening in her chest, a subtle pull toward replaying the tone, the phrasing. the way it had made her feel smaller than she actually was. She paused before unlocking the door. It would have been easy to climb inside, drive home, and let the irritation ride along with her, growing louder as the road stretched out. She had done that before, letting one unpleasant moment seep into everything that followed: coloring dinner, quiet time, even sleep. But standing there in the fading light, she thought again of the apples. How one bruised slice had demanded so much attention simply by being imperfect. How quickly her mind had offered to throw the whole thing away just to avoid dealing with it. She rested her hand on the car door and took a slow breath. The thought came gently without effort. I don't need to keep tasting that. The message had already been read. The moment had already passed. Going over it again wouldn't improve it. It would only spread the bitterness into places it didn't belong. She unlocked the car and sat inside, letting the door close softly behind her. The familiar scent of the interior wrapped around her, grounding her in something ordinary and present. As she drove, she let the day move behind her instead of dragging it forward. The street lights blinked on one by one. Traffic flowed in an easy rhythm. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, no longer gripping as if bracing for impact. Forgiveness crossed her mind, but not in the way she had always imagined it. It wasn't a dramatic release. It wasn't a warm feeling towards someone who hadn't earned it. It was simply a decision not to keep chewing on something that had already gone bad. At home, she set her bag down and moved through her evening routine with a steadiness that surprised her. She washed her hands, changed into softer clothes, put a kettle on the stove, and listened as it slowly came to a boil. The sound filled the kitchen without demanding anything from her. It rose, existed, and settled, just like everything else when she didn't interfere. She poured the hot water into a mug and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the last of the daylight disappeared, leaving the glass to reflect her own quiet movements back at her. For a moment, the message surfaced again, faint and distant. This time, she didn't push it away. She didn't analyze it. She simply noticed it, like noticing the bruised apple sitting off to the side of the plate. There it is, she thought. And then she turned her attention back to the warmth of the mug in her hands, to the simple comfort of the moment she was actually in. That was when she understood something she hadn't before. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant refusing to let one small bitterness define the flavor of everything else. The day still had good parts. The evening still held softness. Tomorrow still waited untouched by that single exchange, unless she chose to bring it along. She took a slow sip and felt the warmth spread through her chest, gentle and steady. The bruised apple remained what it was. It didn't become sweet. It didn't turn fresh again. But it no longer sat in the center of the table. As she finished her tea and prepared for bed, her thoughts felt lighter, less cluttered. There was no replay running in the background, no mental argument being rehearsed for a conversation that might never happen. Just space. And in that space, rest came easily. Not because the day was perfect, not because anyone apologized, but because she chose quietly and without struggle not to let one damaged moment spoil everything else that was still whole. By the time the shift ended, their body already knew it had been holding too much. It wasn't one sharp moment or a single bad interaction. It was the accumulation of small things, stacked quietly on top of one another the way water gathers behind a dam, long before anyone notices the pressure building. They walked down the hospital corridor toward the locker room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead in a steady, indifferent rhythm. The hallway was nearly empty now, just the soft squeak of shoes on polished floors and the distant beeping of a machine somewhere behind closed doors. Their shoulders felt tight. Their neck ached in that dull, familiar way that came from bracing without realizing it. All day they had moved quickly, spoken calmly, absorbed frustration that didn't belong to them, and kept going. That was part of the job. What no one talked about was what happened to all of that feeling once it had nowhere else to go. Inside the locker room, they set their bag down and leaned against the cool metal bench. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing, noticing how shallow each breath felt, like it didn't quite reach the bottom of their lungs. Something inside them wanted to burst, not in anger, not in tears, just in release. They twisted the cap off their water bottle, and the small crack echoed softly in the quiet room. The sound caught their attention, sharp and clear, like the beginning of something opening. They took a long drink, then another, letting the coolness travel down slowly instead of rushing it. Even that simple act felt intentional, like a small permission to pause. As they sat down, their mind returned to the moment that had tipped everything just a little too far. A comment made in passing, a look that dismissed rather than acknowledged, a feeling of being expected to absorb it and move on as if nothing had landed. They had done that, of course. They always did. But now, away from the noise and urgency, the weight of it pressed more clearly against their chest. They pictured it suddenly, without trying to. A dam. Strong. Necessary. Holding back an entire river so life downstream could continue uninterrupted. The structure wasn't the problem. The problem was what happened when there was no release. They had been taught to be that dam, to hold, to contain, to stay intact, no matter how much built up behind the walls. What no one emphasized enough was the importance of the spillway. They reached into their bag and pulled out a small notebook, the kind they kept for grocery lists and reminders. It wasn't meant for emotions, but that almost made it better. There was no pressure to be eloquent, no expectation of insight. They flipped to a blank page and stared at it. For a few seconds, nothing came. Then slowly they wrote a single sentence. "I'm angry that I wasn't listened to." The words looked plain on the page, almost too simple to carry the weight they felt inside. But as soon as the sentence existed outside of them, something shifted. Their chest loosened a fraction, their jaw unclenched without being told. They wrote another line. "I'm tired of being calm when I don't feel calm." The pen moved steadily now, not fast, not rushed. Each sentence felt like opening a small gate, letting a controlled amount of water move through instead of pushing harder against the walls. They didn't blame. They didn't accuse. They didn't justify. They simply named what was there. By the time they closed the notebook, their breathing had deepened, The pressure hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt dangerous. It had somewhere to go. They stood up, slung their bag over their shoulder, and walked toward the exit. The night air outside was cool against their face, grounding in a way that felt immediate and real. As they headed to their car, they noticed something important. They weren't numb. They weren't flooded. They were balanced. The dam was still standing, but the water was no longer threatening to break it. The drive home was quieter than usual, not because there was nothing to think about, but because the pressure had already eased just enough to make space. The road stretched ahead under the glow of streetlights, each one passing in a steady rhythm like a metronome, guiding their breath back into something slower and more natural. They noticed how different their body felt compared to other nights. Usually, this was the moment when everything they had held in all day would start banging against the inside of their chest, demanding attention all at once. Tonight it stayed calmer, as if it trusted that it would be heard again if needed. At a red light, they rested their hands on the steering wheel and felt how relaxed their grip was. Their shoulders weren't hunched, their jaw wasn't locked. That small notebook sat on the passenger seat, closed now, unremarkable, but its presence mattered. It was proof that the feelings didn't have to stay trapped inside to be controlled. At home, they moved through the door quietly, setting their bag down and slipping off their shoes. The apartment was dim, the kind of soft darkness that invites you to slow down instead of rush. They went to the kitchen and poured another glass of water, listening to it hit the bottom of the glass with a clear, gentle sound. As they drank, they thought about how often anger gets misunderstood. People talk about it as something explosive, something dangerous that must be suppressed or avoided at all costs. But what they had felt all day wasn't an explosion. It was pressure. And pressure doesn't disappear by being ignored. They sat at the small table and let their thoughts drift without pushing them in any direction. The moments from earlier surfaced again, but this time without the sharp edges. They could see the situation more clearly now, not because it had changed, but because they weren't drowning in it. That was when forgiveness began to make sense in a new way. Not as an act of generosity towards someone else, not as a sudden release of understanding, but as a commitment to maintenance. Just like a dam needs regular controlled release to stay strong, they needed a way to let feelings move through without destroying anything in the process. They didn't need to confront anyone tonight. They didn't need to explain themselves perfectly. They didn't even need an apology. They just needed to keep the spillway open. Later, as they prepared for bed, they noticed how easily their bodies settled. There was no restless pacing, no urge to replay conversations or rehearse what they might say next time. The water had already been released. As they lay down, the thought came quietly, without weight. Forgiveness isn't about letting everything go at once. It's about letting a little go often enough that nothing breaks. Their breathing slowed. The day loosened its grip. What had felt heavy and overwhelming hours earlier now felt manageable, contained, and far less personal. The dam held. The river flowed. Nothing collapsed. And in that balance, sleep arrived naturally, without force, without resistance, carrying them into rest, the way water moves when it's finally allowed to follow its path. Anger changes the color of everything. Not in a poetic way, in a practical way. It makes neutral words sound insulting. It makes silence feel like punishment. It makes small problems look like proof. And the hardest part is that in the moment, it feels like clarity, like you're finally seeing the truth. She was sitting at a small desk with a lamp on the rest of the room dark. The light made a warm circle on the tabletop, leaving everything else in soft shadow. Her laptop was open, email drafted, cursor blinking like a metronome. She had written it 3 times already. The first version was sharp. The kind of sharp that felt good for about 2 seconds. The second version was longer, full of careful explanations and evidence, as if more words could force understanding. The third version was short again, cold and clean, designed to land. Now she stared at the screen and felt her body buzzing. Not with energy, with tension. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders were lifted, her breath was shallow, hovering at the top of her chest. The email wasn't about something huge, not a lawsuit, not a breakup. Just a work situation that had been handled badly. A decision made without her input. A message that had dismissed her concern like it was inconvenient. The kind of thing that could be addressed calmly when you're calm. But she wasn't calm. She could feel the red fog in her mind like a filter dropped over everything. It made the other person look careless, even malicious. It made her own pain feel like the only reality in the room. She knew this state. She'd sent emails from here before, and she'd regretted them. Not because she was wrong to be upset, but because anger made her aim for damage instead of clarity. It made her want to win, not resolve. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of her laptop fan. Outside, a car passed and then disappeared, the sound fading quickly into the night. She opened her eyes again. The draft waited. Her finger hovered over send. She didn't want to wait. Waiting felt weak. Waiting felt like letting them get away with it. Waiting felt like swallowing it again. But she also knew that sending it now would lock her into this version of herself. The tense, overheated version. The one who speaks from the fog. She looked at the email and tried to read it as if she were the recipient. The tone was tight. Even the polite phrases sounded sharp, like knives wrapped in napkins. She breathed out slowly and felt the smallest shift in her chest, like a window cracking open. What if she didn't decide anything tonight? What if the only job for tonight was to let the fog thin? She moved her hand away from the mouse and placed it on the desk, palm flat. She felt the cool surface under her skin. Grounding, real, not a thought. She stood up and walked to the kitchen, leaving the laptop open. The cursor blinked behind her back, waiting. She poured a glass of water and drank it. The coldness helped, but the anger still colored her thoughts. She could feel it in the way her mind tried to build a case, gather proof, rehearse lines. In the living room, she paused by the window. Streetlights cast pale stripes across the road. The night looked ordinary, indifferent. It didn't match the urgency in her chest, and that mismatch made her notice something. The urgency was coming from inside her, not from the situation itself. She didn't need to solve anything at 11:40 p.m. The office would still be there tomorrow. The email could still be sent tomorrow. The only thing that would change between now and tomorrow was her state of mind. And that mattered. She went back to the desk and sat down again. Instead of hitting send, she did something small and very specific. She changed the subject line to something neutral. Then, she saved the draft. She didn't delete it. She didn't rewrite it. She just saved it, like placing something down on a shelf instead of carrying it around. Then she closed the laptop. The click was soft, but it felt decisive. The anger didn't disappear, but the fog stopped thickening. Without the bright screen and the blinking cursor, her mind had less to orbit. She turned off the desk lamp and stood there in the dim room. Her body was still warm with tension, but it was no longer rushing toward an action. She realized something quiet waiting wasn't weakness. Waiting was giving herself a chance to see clearly. Because decisions made in red fog weren't really decisions. They were reactions. She didn't need to react tonight. She just needed to let the fog thin. She didn't open the laptop first thing in the morning. That surprised her. Normally, the email would have been the first thing she checked, the unfinished business, pulling her back into the same tight place. But the fog from the night before had thinned while she slept. Not completely gone, just lighter. Enough to breathe through. She made coffee. The machine gurgled and hissed, filling the kitchen with a familiar smell. The morning light came in softly, touching the edges of the counter and the floor. Nothing urgent announced itself. When she finally sat down at the desk, she felt different in her body. Her shoulders were lower, her jaw wasn't clenched. The anger hadn't vanished, but it wasn't flooding her anymore. It was contained, manageable. She opened the laptop and pulled up the saved draft. Reading it now felt strange, like reading something written by a slightly different version of herself. The words weren't wrong exactly, but the tone was heavy, pressed. Even the reasonable points felt wrapped in accusation. She imagined sending it as is and watched the scene play out in her head. The defensiveness it would spark. The careful reply that wouldn't actually address the issue. The quiet escalation that would follow. She didn't want that. She placed both feet flat on the floor and took one slow breath before touching the keyboard. Not as a ritual, just to check in. Then she began to edit. She didn't soften the truth. She didn't remove the boundary. But she took out the heat. She replaced sharp phrases with clear ones. She shortened sentences that were trying to do too much. She cut entire paragraphs that existed only to prove how right she was. With each change, she felt the fog lift another notch. The email became simpler, cleaner, more direct. It said what had happened. It said how it had affected her work. It said what she needed going forward. No more, no less. When she finished, she leaned back and noticed how her body responded. There was no rush, no spike, no urge to hit send immediately. That was new. She read it one last time, not to perfect it, but to feel it. The message didn't feel like a weapon anymore. It felt like a statement. She sent it. The moment passed quietly. No dramatic relief, no regret. Just the soft whoosh of an email leaving her outbox. She closed the laptop and stood up, letting the chair roll back slightly. The room felt the same, but she didn't. The fog hadn't just lifted, it had taught her something. Anger wasn't the enemy. It was a signal. It showed her where something mattered, where a line had been crossed. But clarity didn't come from acting inside the fog. It came from waiting long enough for the color to return to normal. Later, as the day unfolded, she received a reply. It wasn't perfect. It didn't undo what had happened. But it acknowledged her point. It shifted the tone. It opened a different path forward. Even if it hadn't, she realized she would have been okay. Because the real win hadn't been the response. It had been the choice not to decide while her vision was tinted red. That afternoon, she caught herself smiling slightly at something unrelated. The body remembers when it's no longer bracing. She went about her day with steadier steps, the night's tension no longer steering her. The fog had done what fog always does when you don't drive into it head first. It thinned. They sat on the edge of the couch. With a notebook resting on their knees, the room lit only by a small lamp near the wall. Outside, the evening had settled in quietly, without any announcement. It had been one of those days. Nothing terrible had happened. Nothing especially good either. But their mind felt crowded, like too many thoughts had been left open at the same time. They opened the notebook and stared at the blank page. Usually, when emotions showed up like this, they tried to push them away. Stay busy, scroll longer, distract harder. Tonight, none of that worked, so they stayed where they were. A thought rose first, sharp and impatient. I should be doing more. Then another followed close behind. I'm falling behind. Then a quieter one, harder to catch. Something is wrong with me. They recognized the pattern. Once one thought appeared, the others rushed in, each one pulling the next along with it like a small herd that refused to move in a straight line. They picked up the pen and wrote the first word that came to mind. Tired. They paused, surprised by how true it felt. Another feeling nudged forward, anxious. Then one more, lonely. The page began to fill slowly, not with explanations, but with names. They had learned something during their training about emotions, about the nervous system, about how feelings worked. But knowing didn't always make it easier to live with them. Tonight, though, a different image came to mind. A shepherd, not shouting, not chasing, just standing steady, watching the flock move, guiding it gently when it drifted too far. They looked at the list again. These weren't enemies. They were signals. Each emotion wanted something. Rest, reassurance, connection. None of them needed to be eliminated. They took a slow breath and placed a hand on their chest. For once, they didn't try to fix how they felt. They simply noticed it. The emotions shifted slightly, not disappearing but loosening their grip as if relieved to be seen. They wrote another word. Present. That one surprised them too. They leaned back against the couch, the notebook still open, and let their breathing find its own rhythm. Maybe leadership didn't mean control. Maybe it meant staying close enough not to abandon what was already here. The room felt calmer, even though the thoughts hadn't stopped completely. They were still there, but they weren't running the show. They closed the notebook and set it on the table, not because everything had been sorted out, but because that was enough for tonight. The lamp cast a soft circle of light across the room, leaving the rest in shadow. They noticed how different their body felt now. The tightness in their shoulders had eased. Their jaw wasn't clenched anymore. The emotions were still present, moving quietly in the background, but they no longer felt overwhelming. They had space to move without colliding. They thought again about the image of the shepherd. A shepherd didn't demand silence from the flock, didn't expect perfect order. The job wasn't to stop movement. It was to keep the group together and moving in the same general direction. They realized that leadership, when it came to their inner world, looked like this: staying awake, staying kind, setting gentle boundaries. When worry tried to run ahead, they noticed it and slowed their pace. When sadness lagged behind, they didn't leave it there. Nothing was pushed out. Nothing was shamed. They had spent years believing that emotional strength meant being unaffected, that calm meant the absence of feeling. Now they saw it differently. Calm was the ability to stay present while feelings moved through. They turned off the lamp and let the room grow darker. As they lay down, their thoughts drifted again, but without urgency. They didn't chase them. They didn't wrestle them. They trusted themselves to guide the night gently. Outside, the world continued as it always did. Inside, they rested in the quiet understanding that they were no longer being dragged by their emotions. They were walking with them. And that made all the difference. He noticed the plant the way you notice something you've been ignoring. Not because it suddenly appeared, but because you finally looked. It sat near the window in a simple clay pot, leaves slightly drooped soil, looking dry and tired. Nothing dramatic, no dead stems, no falling leaves all over the floor. Just a quiet sign of neglect. He stood there with his keys still in his hand, coat half on, mind already moving toward tomorrow. He had a habit of taking care of what was urgent first, what was loud, what demanded attention: emails, deadlines, messages he felt he should answer right away. But the plant didn't ask. It waited. He set his keys down, walked into the kitchen, and filled a small glass with water. The tap ran for a second, then steadied into a clean stream. He carried the water back and poured slowly. The soil darkened almost immediately, soaking it in as if it had been holding its breath. A faint, earthy smell rose up, soft and familiar. He watched the water disappear into the dirt and felt something in him settle. It was such a small action. Almost nothing. And yet it did something his mind had been struggling to do all day: bring him back to himself. He had been feeling stretched lately, not in a dramatic way. More like he was constantly one step behind his own life, always reacting, always managing. He took care of everyone else's needs first, At work, he solved problems. At home, he kept things running. Even when he rested with one eye open. And somewhere in that pace, his inner world had started to look like this plant. Still alive, still there, but quietly drying out. He touched one leaf gently with his fingertip. It wasn't crisp. It wasn't ruined. It just needed attention. He thought about how often he waited for a big moment to start healing. A vacation, a fresh week, a perfect morning. As if care only counted when it came in large doses. But gardening didn't work that way. Plants didn't need a grand gesture. They needed steady water, light, small acts done consistently. He looked around his apartment. It was clean enough, functional. But he realized how little he had asked himself lately, how am I doing? Not as a performance question, not as a checklist, as a real check-in. He sat down by the window with the plant in front of him, hands resting on his knees. Outside, traffic moved and the world kept going. Inside, he stayed still for a moment. He didn't feel suddenly peaceful. He just felt present, and that he realized was the first kind of watering. He stayed by the window longer than he planned to, watching how the light shifted across the floor as the afternoon moved on. The plant looked the same, maybe a little heavier, like it was settling back into itself. He knew it wouldn't change right away. That wasn't how plants worked. They responded slowly, quietly, in ways you only noticed if you paid attention over time. That felt familiar. He thought about how often he treated himself differently, expecting immediate improvement, quick relief, clear results. When those didn't show up, he assumed he was doing something wrong. But gardens weren't fixed in a day. They were tended. He reached into the soil gently and felt around the surface. There were small weeds there, nothing dramatic, just thin stems that had grown unnoticed among the roots. He pinched one and pulled it free. It came out easily. He smiled to himself at how simple that felt. Not everything that crowded a garden belonged there. Not every thought that took up space deserved to stay. He thought about the beliefs he had been carrying for years without questioning them. That rest had to be earned. That caring for himself was selfish. That he could tend to his own needs later once everything else was handled. Those were weeds. They had grown quietly, fed by repetition and habit, not truth. He didn't blame himself for them. He simply noticed them. And noticing, he realized, was already an act of care. He placed the plant back where it belonged and stood up, feeling lighter than before. Not healed, not finished, just slightly more aligned. That evening, he cooked a simple meal instead of skipping dinner. He turned off his phone earlier than usual. He went to bed without replaying the day in his head. None of it felt dramatic, but it felt right. As he lay there in the dark, he understood something gently. Taking care of himself wasn't a side project. It was the main work. Not because it made him better than anyone else, but because it allowed him to live as himself without constantly running on empty. The plant by the window would need water again soon, and so would he. He closed his eyes, knowing that tending to his inner garden wasn't something to finish. It was something to return to again and again. The bathroom light is softer than the lights she has been under all day. Not bright, not demanding, just enough to let her see herself without asking her to perform. She turns on the faucet and lets the water run for a second longer than needed, listening to the steady sound as if it were something familiar she forgot she missed. When she leans forward and splashes her face, the water is cool, almost sharp, and it pulls her attention out of the long day that is still clinging to her shoulders. She looks up at the mirror without really looking yet. All day she has worn the same expression, the polite smile that shows calm and competence, the careful eyes that say, "I'm listening. I've got this." The steady voice that doesn't rush and doesn't shake. It's a face she learned over time, not all at once, piece by piece. At first it was just part of the job. Then it became part of how people recognized her. Then slowly it started to feel like who she was supposed to be. In the mirror, she reaches for the towel and presses it gently against her skin. Not scrubbing, not rushing, just holding it there as if her face needs a moment to catch up with her body. The towel smells faintly like clean cotton and something floral she chose months ago without thinking too much about it. When she lowers the towel, her face looks different. Not dramatic, just quieter. There are faint lines near her eyes that weren't there when she was younger, and a tired softness around her mouth that no amount of sleep seems to fully erase. But there is also something else. Something harder to name, something that feels closer to the beginning of things. She tilts her head slightly, studying her reflection, the way you might study a place you once lived in, trying to remember how it felt before life filled it with furniture. She thinks about all the labels she carries without noticing most days. Reliable, responsible, good with people, strong under pressure. None of them are wrong. But none of them are the whole story either. Somewhere along the way, she started wearing those words the way you wear a uniform. At first it helped. It gave her shape and purpose. It told others how to treat her and told her how to move through the world. But uniforms are heavy when you forget you can take them off. She reaches up and tucks a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a small automatic gesture she's done 1,000 times. The mirror reflects the movement back to her, slow and ordinary. And for a moment she imagines herself years ago, before schedules and certifications and expectations stacked up so neatly around her life. She tries to remember her face from then. Not the face in photos. Not the face other people remember. The face she had when no one was watching her closely. When no one needed anything from her. When she wasn't being evaluated, thanked, or depended on. The memory doesn't come clearly. It arrives in pieces. A laugh that was louder and less controlled. Eyes that wandered instead of focusing. A softness that didn't need to be justified. She notices how strange it feels to even ask the question, who was I before the world decided who I should be? The mirror doesn't answer, but it doesn't push back either. She turns off the faucet, and the sudden quiet feels bigger than expected. Without the sound of running water, the room feels still, almost like it's waiting. The hum of the house at night settles in, distant and low, and she becomes aware of her breathing again. Inhale, exhale. She doesn't try to change it. For years she thought healing meant adding things, more confidence, more skills. more proof that she was enough. But standing here barefaced and tired, she feels a different truth brushing up against her awareness. Maybe it isn't about adding at all. Maybe it's about noticing what was placed on her gently at first, then layered again and again until she forgot where her own edges were. Expectations can be quiet like that. They don't shout. They settle. She leans her palms against the counter and lets her shoulders drop just a little, not collapsing, just loosening. The mirror shows the change immediately, as if her body has been waiting for permission to stop holding itself up so carefully. For a brief moment, she doesn't try to look capable or composed or kind. She just looks. And in that simple act, something soft begins to stir. Not a solution, not an answer, but a sense that beneath all the names she has been called, all the roles she has played well, there is still a face that belongs only to her. A face that was never meant to be earned. She stays there longer than she planned to, not because she is searching for something dramatic, but because for once, nothing is asking her to hurry. The mirror doesn't demand answers. The room doesn't expect performance. Even her own thoughts feel less insistent, as if they've agreed to sit quietly in the background. She straightens up slowly and reaches for the small container on the counter, the one she opens and closes every night without thinking. Tonight she pauses before using it. Her hands rest on the lid, fingers relaxed, not gripping. It occurs to her how often she moves through life on autopilot, guided by invisible checklists that live somewhere between her mind and her muscles. Do this, be that. Don't forget, don't slip. These habits didn't come from nowhere. They grew from praise, from responsibility, from wanting to be useful and needed. None of that was wrong. But over time, the habits stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like rules. She looks at her reflection again this time, not as a problem to solve, but as a presence to keep company with. Her eyes don't look heroic or broken. They look human. And something about that feels grounding. She thinks about how often people talk about finding your worth, as if it were something hidden under layers of effort, waiting to be discovered by doing more, proving more, enduring more. But standing here, she feels something simpler and quieter settling in. Worth was never missing. It was just buried under things that were never truly hers. Expectations that fit at first and then slowly grew tight. Roles that were useful but not complete. Stories she learned to repeat because they made sense to other people. She exhales slowly and feels the air move through her chest, not forced, not practiced, just real. The mirror shows the rise and fall of her breath, small and steady, and she realizes she hasn't been this aware of herself all day. Maybe healing doesn't start with becoming someone new. Maybe it starts with allowing yourself to stop being who you were told you had to be. She finally opens the container and applies what she needs. Her movements unhurried, almost ceremonial, though she doesn't think of it that way. It's just care offered without negotiation. No reward at the end, no one keeping score. She remembers how as a child she used to make faces at mirrors. Silly ones, curious ones. Faces that changed every few seconds because there was no reason to hold on to any of them for too long. Somewhere along the way, that freedom disappeared, not stolen, just set aside. The thought doesn't bring sadness the way it once might have. It feels more like recognition, like finding an old photograph and realizing the person in it never really left. They just learned how to be quiet. She steps back from the counter and turns off the light, leaving only the dim glow from the hallway. In the softer shadow, her reflection fades slightly less sharp, less defined. And strangely, that feels right. She doesn't need to see herself clearly all the time. She doesn't need to name herself correctly. She doesn't need to hold her shape so tightly. As she leaves the bathroom, she catches her reflection one last time in the darkened mirror. It's incomplete, blurred at the edges, but there is a calm there that wasn't present before. Not confidence, not certainty, just ease. She walks down the hallway and into the quiet of her home, carrying nothing extra with her. No new goals, no promises to do better tomorrow. Just the subtle relief of having put something down. Maybe the self she's been searching for isn't waiting at the end of a long journey. Maybe it's been here all along, beneath the labels, beneath the effort, patient and untouched, ready to be met again the moment she stops trying to earn her place in her own life. And for tonight, that is enough. Up here, the city sounds different. Not gone, just softened, as if someone turned the volume knob down and left only what was necessary. The wind moves steadily across the rooftop, brushing past the edges of the building and slipping through the small gaps near the door, carrying with it a faint hum that feels older than traffic, older than schedules. He steps closer to the railing and rests his forearms on the cool metal, letting his weight lean forward just enough to feel supported, not strained. Below him, the city stretches outward in scattered lights, windows glowing softly, streets drawing thin lines of movement that look calmer from this distance. From up here, everything feels slower. He checks his radio out of habit, even though nothing has come through for a while. Just static and the occasional clipped voice from somewhere else in the building, reminding him that he's still on duty, still responsible. He lowers the volume again and lets the quiet return. People think being alone like this must feel heavy. And sometimes it does. There are nights when the silence presses in, when the height makes him feel smaller instead of free. When the distance between him and everyone else feels wider than the streets below. But tonight, the quiet doesn't demand anything from him. It just exists. He shifts his stance, boots planted firmly, and looks up. The clouds sit low in the sky, drifting slowly, pale and thick, brushing against the tops of taller buildings, as if they belong there. For a moment, it feels like he's standing right at their edge, not above the city, but alongside the sky itself. He didn't plan to end up here watching over empty hallways and locked doors at night. It started as something temporary. A job to pay bills, a role that didn't follow him home in the same way others might. Over time, it became familiar, predictable, quiet enough to think. And thinking, he has learned, can be both a gift and a burden. During the day, the world is full of noise and motion. People bump into each other, talk over one another, measure themselves against what they see. At night, up on the roof, there's no one to impress, no one to explain himself to. Still, the feeling of being separate lingers. He's spent enough time alone to recognize the difference between loneliness and solitude, even though the line between them can blur without warning. Loneliness feels sharp, like something missing. Solitude feels wide, like something opening. Tonight leans toward wide. He watches the clouds drift and thinks about all the ways people climb in their lives, always looking toward some imagined peak where things will finally make sense. Better job, better version of themselves, a place where doubt no longer reaches. He's been there too, chasing that idea, believing that worth was something earned by reaching higher, standing out, proving endurance. But standing here now, he realizes something quieter. Reaching the top doesn't always look like standing above others. Sometimes it looks like standing alone without falling apart. The wind picks up slightly, tugging at his jacket, and he pulls it closer. Not because he's cold, but because the movement reminds him that he's still here, still in his body, still breathing in this moment that doesn't need to be shared. He thinks about how often he's judged himself for choosing a path that feels small to others, a job people don't ask many questions about, a life that doesn't come with impressive stories or visible milestones. For a long time, that bothered him. He felt like he was missing something important, like he should be striving harder, climbing faster, reaching for something more obvious. But lately, that pressure has started to loosen just a little, like a knot slowly giving way. Up here, there's no applause, no recognition, no one watching to decide whether he matters. And yet, there is steadiness. He taps the railing lightly with his fingers, feeling the vibration travel through the metal and into his hands. The building beneath him feels solid, grounded, doing exactly what it was built to do. He wonders when he stopped trusting himself to be the same. Maybe value doesn't always announce itself. Maybe it doesn't need an audience or a finish line. Maybe it can exist quietly, like this moment, high enough to see clearly, alone enough to hear what usually gets drowned out. He stays there, breathing in the cool air, letting the city remain below him instead of inside his head, unaware that without trying to reach anything higher, he's already touching something rare. A kind of peace that doesn't come from arrival, but from allowing himself to stand exactly where he is. He doesn't check the time. Up here, minutes lose their sharp edges. There is no screen reminding him to move faster, no voice counting down what he should be doing next. The night stretches gently, and for once, he lets it. He steps back from the railing and walks a slow circle along the rooftop boots, making soft, familiar sounds against the concrete. Each step feels deliberate, not because he's trying to be mindful, but because the space naturally asks for it. There are places in life where noise fades without effort. This is one of them. He stops near the door and looks out again, this time noticing how the lights below don't compete with one another. They simply exist, scattered uneven, some bright, some dim, all of them enough in their own way. For years he thought being seen was the same thing as being valued. If no one noticed his effort, he assumed it didn't count. If no one asked about his nights, he felt like they didn't matter. That belief followed him quietly, shaping how he measured himself when no one else was around. But standing here alone with the wind and the low clouds, that belief begins to feel less solid. What if value isn't something that needs to be confirmed? What if worth doesn't disappear just because it isn't witnessed? He leans back against the wall and lets his head rest there for a moment. Eyes half closed, listening to the distant sounds of the city rise and fall like a breath. In this position, he feels supported not by attention or praise, but by something simpler: presence. He remembers times when being alone felt like failure, like evidence that he had missed a step everyone else seemed to know. He remembers the subtle shame of quiet weekends, unanswered messages, empty spaces on his calendar. Those memories still exist, but they don't carry the same weight now. Up here, solitude doesn't ask him to explain himself. It doesn't judge his pace or compare his path to anyone else's. It allows him to exist without needing to become something more impressive. The clouds shift again, slowly breaking apart, revealing small patches of clear sky. He watches them without expectation, without trying to read meaning into their movement. Things change on their own, he thinks. Not because we force them to, but because that's what they do. He adjusts his jacket and notices how his body feels less tense than it did earlier in the night. His shoulders have dropped. His jaw isn't clenched. The constant low-level effort of holding himself together has eased, even if just a little. He realizes how rarely he gives himself permission to rest in who he already is. So much of life has been about becoming better, becoming stronger, becoming someone worth choosing. But here on this quiet summit, there is no one to become. There is only standing. And in that standing, he feels something anchor into place. Not pride, not accomplishment, just a steady sense of being enough without needing to rise any higher. He opens his eyes fully and takes one last look at the city below. It hasn't changed. The lights still flicker. The streets still move. Life continues without noticing his pause. And somehow, that's comforting. He turns toward the door, ready to return to the quiet corridors and the rest of his shift, carrying nothing extra with him. No conclusions. No promises to reinvent his life. Just the understanding that being alone doesn't mean being lacking. Sometimes it simply means you've reached a place high enough and quiet enough to remember that your worth doesn't depend on how many people are standing beside you. And that too is a kind of summit. Some worries don't come from what we see. They come from how unclear the seeing has become. Late that night, the person stood in a small bathroom, the kind with soft yellow light and a mirror that had seen better days. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ventilation fan. The sink held a few water spots. The mirror showed thin streaks where steam had dried unevenly. The person leaned closer, noticing their own reflection looked slightly dull. Not distorted, just muted. Like something was between the eyes and the image. It had been one of those days where the mind kept questioning itself. Not loudly, just persistently. Did I misread that situation? Why do I feel unsure about something so small? What if I'm not seeing this clearly? The person reached for a hand towel hanging nearby and wiped a small section of the mirror. The cloth moved easily, leaving behind a clearer patch. The reflection there looked sharper, more precise. The contrast was noticeable. The rest of the mirror still looked hazy, but that clean spot stood out. Nothing about the person had changed, only the surface in front of them. Overthinking often works this way. The mind assumes confusion means something is wrong with what it's looking at. It forgets to check the lens. The person wiped another section of the mirror, then another. Each pass revealed more detail. The face looked the same, but the image felt more trustworthy, less questionable. There was a quiet satisfaction in that. Not because the reflection was important, but because clarity didn't require effortful thinking. It required a simple action. The person paused, towel resting against the sink. The thoughts from earlier still lingered, but they felt less urgent now, less personal. Maybe nothing was wrong with the situation. Maybe the view had just been clouded. The mirror wasn't broken. It was dusty. The person turned on the faucet, briefly rinsing the towel. The sound of water filled the room, steady and grounding. As the towel was wrung out, droplets fell into the sink, each one landing and disappearing without leaving a trace. That felt familiar too. The person returned to the mirror, wiping the remaining areas, slowly, not rushing. The strokes were uneven, imperfect, but effective. The image sharpened bit by bit. Overthinking tends to pile up quietly. A doubt here, a second guess there. Each one settles like dust, barely noticeable at first. Over time, the surface becomes less clear and the mind assumes the blur is permanent. But dust isn't damage. The person stepped back and looked at the mirror again. It wasn't spotless. A few streaks remained. But it was clear enough. The reflection felt stable. The person studied their own eyes for a moment. Not critically, just observing. The face looked tired, but familiar, real. The doubts from earlier returned briefly, testing the space. What if you're still missing something? The thought arrived, then softened. Even a clean mirror doesn't show everything at once. It shows what's in front of it. Nothing more. The person placed the towel back on the rack and turned off the light above the sink. The room dimmed slightly, shadows smoothing the edges of things. Clarity didn't mean certainty. It meant fewer distortions. The person leaned against the counter, letting the body rest. The mind felt quieter now. Not because the questions were answered, but because they no longer felt so close to the face. Distance helped. The mirror stood there, calm and neutral, ready to reflect whatever came next. It didn't judge. It didn't analyze. It simply showed what was there when it was allowed to be clean enough. And for now, that was sufficient. The bathroom felt quieter after the light was turned off. Only the small night light near the floor remained on, casting a soft glow across the tiles. The mirror reflected less now, but what it did show felt gentler, less exposed. The person stayed there for a moment, not checking their reflection again, just standing with hands resting on the counter. The surface was cool and solid, something real to lean on. The doubts from earlier in the day tried to return, but they came more slowly now. They didn't rush in all at once. They appeared one by one, like dust settling after the air has already begun to clear. What if I judged that wrong? What if I misunderstood someone's tone? What if I'm not as capable as I think? Each thought arrived, hovered, then passed without being pulled closer. The person noticed the difference. Earlier, these thoughts had felt right up against the face, demanding attention. Now they stayed at a distance. The mirror had helped with that, not by answering anything, but by changing how close the questions felt. Overthinking often presses the mind too close to the problem, so close that everything looks distorted. Small details feel huge. Uncertainty feels like failure. Stepping back doesn't remove the question. It restores proportion. The person turned slightly and caught a partial reflection in the mirror from the side. It wasn't sharp, but it was recognizable. Enough to know who was standing there. That seemed important. Clarity doesn't mean perfect visibility. It means not mistaking blur for truth. The person left the bathroom and walked down the hallway. The house was quiet now. Lights were low. The day had finally reached its end. In the bedroom, a lamp cast a warm circle onto the wall. The person sat on the edge of the bed and took off their shoes, slowly, one at a time. Each movement felt unhurried. The mind continued to offer thoughts, but they felt thinner, less convincing, like reflections seen through glass rather than direct experience. The person remembered how earlier the mirror had looked dull, almost unreliable. Nothing about the person had changed during that time, only the layer in between. So many worries work like that. They don't reflect reality as it is. They reflect it through layers of doubt, fatigue, memory, and habit. The mind forgets that the surface can be cleaned. The person lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Shadows from the lamp softened the corners of the room. The body felt heavier now, not from tension, but from tiredness. A final thought drifted through, quieter than the rest. Maybe I don't need to look so closely tonight. That thought didn't ask for agreement. It simply passed like a suggestion offered without pressure. The mirror in the bathroom would gather dust again. Steam would rise. Water spots would return. That was normal. Cleaning it once didn't mean it would stay clear forever. But knowing it could be cleaned changed something. The person closed their eyes, letting the day sit where it was. No need to recheck, no need to review. Some days require action. Some days require clarity. And some days only require not mistaking dust for damage. The room remained still. The thoughts grew softer, then fewer. And in that quiet, the mind rested, not because everything was resolved, but because the view no longer felt distorted. That was enough for tonight. Some fears don't come from falling. They come from staring too long at what might break. Late in the afternoon, the person sat in a parked car engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. The driveway was quiet. A porch light across the street flicked on as the sky dimmed. Nothing urgent waited inside the house yet. The person hadn't gotten out of the car. The mind was busy. What if things don't hold? What if this support disappears? What if I'm not ready when it does? The thoughts circled around the same idea. Stability. Or rather, the fear of losing it. The person leaned back slightly and looked up through the windshield. A tree stood nearby, its branches reaching out over the street. Near the end of one branch, a small bird perched, still and alert. The branch swayed gently with the breeze, bending just enough to be noticed. The bird didn't move. The person watched, attention settling without effort. The branch dipped a little farther, then rose again. The bird adjusted its weight almost imperceptibly, feathers shifting, claws tightening briefly, then relaxing. It stayed. The mind immediately supplied commentary. What if the branch snaps? Why would it trust something so thin? The bird didn't seem concerned. It wasn't testing the branch. It wasn't rehearsing escape. It was simply there, responding to what was actually happening. The person noticed how the body felt while watching. The shoulders had been tight moments ago. Now they had softened slightly. Breathing slowed. Overthinking often assumes safety comes from external support, from structures, plans, guarantees. The mind scans the branch endlessly, measuring its strength, imagining failure. But the bird wasn't focused on the branch alone. It had wings. That realization didn't arrive as a lesson. It arrived as a quiet observation. The bird's confidence didn't come from believing the branch would never break. It came from knowing what to do if it did. The person shifted in the seat, feeling the texture of the steering wheel under their palms. Solid, familiar. Yet the thought lingered, how often have I been staring at the branch instead of remembering my wings? The bird hopped once, repositioning itself closer to the trunk. The movement was simple, efficient. No panic, no hesitation. The branch swayed again. The bird adapted again. The person's thoughts drifted to earlier worries. Concerns about work, about timing, about whether the current situation would last. The mind had been gripping those questions tightly, as if watching long enough could prevent change. But nothing stays still forever. The bird didn't demand permanence. It didn't expect the branch to be unchanging. It responded moment by moment without projecting too far ahead. The person felt a subtle release in the chest. Not relief exactly. More like remembering something that had been forgotten. The car remained parked. The house remained quiet. Nothing external had shifted. Yet internally, the fear felt slightly less convincing. The branch wasn't dangerous. It was just temporary. And the bird wasn't reckless. It was capable. The person watched as the bird eventually took off, not because the branch failed, but because it chose to. Wings opened smoothly, catching the air without effort. In a second, the branch was empty, still swaying gently. The bird landed on another branch nearby, then another, moving freely, unconcerned with where it had been moments before. The person exhaled slowly. Fear often tells us to hold tighter, to cling to what feels stable. But clinging doesn't stop change, it only exhausts the one holding on. The person finally turned off the remaining dashboard lights and opened the car door. Cool air rushed in briefly. Feet touched the ground. The tree stood quietly nearby, branches still moving with the breeze. The bird was no longer visible, but the image remained. Stability doesn't come from the branch never breaking. It comes from knowing you can fly. The person walked toward the house, not free of worry, but less dependent on certainty. And for now, that was enough. Inside the house, the evening moved at its usual pace. Shoes were set by the door. A light was turned on, then another. The familiar sounds returned: the soft click of a switch, the low hum of the refrigerator starting up again. The person moved through these motions without hurry. The image of the bird stayed nearby, not as a picture to replay, but as a feeling that had settled somewhere behind the ribs. The worries from earlier tried to reassemble themselves. What if this situation changes too fast? What if I lose what's holding me up? What if I can't adapt in time? They arrived quietly now, less demanding than before. The person noticed how different they felt when not fed by constant inspection. Fear often asks us to look outward for reassurance, to measure the strength of what we're standing on, to calculate how long it might last. But the bird hadn't done any of that. It hadn't tested the branch or evaluated risk in advance. It had responded. The person poured a glass of water and stood at the counter, noticing the simple weight of the glass in the hand. The surface was cool, solid, real. Yet even this, like the branch, was temporary. It could slip, it could break. Life offered no permanent surfaces, and still the body knew how to hold it. That felt familiar. There had been other moments in life when things shifted suddenly. Jobs changed, relationships ended, plans dissolved without warning. At the time, the fear had been intense, convincing. But looking back, there had always been a next movement. Not always graceful, not always easy, but possible. The person sat down at the table, setting the glass aside. The room felt quieter now. Not because worries were gone, but because they were no longer being treated as threats. The mind had spent so much time staring at the branch, checking stability, predicting collapse, that it had forgotten its own capacity to respond. The bird hadn't waited for certainty before trusting the moment. It trusted its ability to move when needed. The person felt a subtle shift in posture, shoulders settling back instead of forward. The chest felt less guarded. Breathing moved lower, slower. Outside, the tree branches were still visible through the window, moving gently in the dark. The bird was gone now, somewhere else entirely. Not lost, just not attached. That seemed important. The person realized that much of their anxiety had come from mistaking support for safety. From believing that as long as the branch held, everything would be fine, and if it didn't, everything would fall apart. But safety hadn't come from the branch at all. It had come from the wings. This wasn't about confidence or bravado. It wasn't about pretending fear didn't exist. It was about remembering that adaptation is real, even when outcomes are unknown. The person finished the water and rinsed the glass, placing it upside down on the counter. The small action felt complete. Enough. Thoughts still passed through the mind, but they didn't linger. They didn't insist on answers. They felt more like passing weather than fixed conditions. The evening continued. Lights were dimmed. The house settled further into stillness. The person paused once more near the window, looking out at the tree. The branches moved just as they had before. The wind came and went, unconcerned with who was watching. Change would come again. It always did. But the fear of it no longer felt so heavy. The person turned away and moved on, with the night, not clinging to the branch, not denying the wind, just trusting that when movement was required, it would be possible. The bird didn't need to believe the branch would never break. It only needed to remember how to fly. And for now, that quiet trust was enough to rest. They sit on a metal bench at the edge of a quiet bus station, long after the last announcement has echoed and faded into the ceiling. The place smells faintly of old coffee and rain carried in on jackets. Their shoulders ache in a dull, familiar way. The kind of ache that doesn't surprise them anymore. Because it has been there for so long, it almost feels like part of their posture. The backpack rests on the floor between their feet. It's not large, not obviously overstuffed, but the straps cut into their shoulders as if it carries more than clothes and a phone charger. When they lean forward and lift it slightly, even for a moment, the weight pulls down with quiet insistence, reminding them that everything they've been carrying is still there. They tell themselves this is normal. Everyone who travels long enough learns to live with weight. You adjust. You tighten the straps. You keep going. A bus pulls in somewhere down the platform, its brakes hissing softly, but it isn't theirs. They check the screen anyway, even though they already know the departure time hasn't changed. The waiting gives their mind too much room to wander, and it does exactly what it always does when there's nothing urgent to distract it. It starts listing things that should have gone differently. Conversations replayed with sharper words. Decisions reviewed like receipts pulled from a pocket and smoothed out again and again as if something new might appear on the paper. They imagine future problems too, lining them up neatly, just in case they forget to worry about them later. They shift on the bench, feeling the cold seep through the metal. The backpack leans against their shin now, steady and solid, like proof that they are prepared. That's what they've always believed anyway. If you carry enough, you won't be caught off guard. If you think far enough ahead, nothing will surprise you too badly. They unzip the top pocket to look for their headphones, and the sound of the zipper is louder than expected in the quiet station. Inside, things are packed carefully, each item placed with intention. A folded jacket, a notebook with half-filled pages, a book they keep meaning to finish, receipts they don't need but haven't thrown away yet. They pause, fingers resting on the edge of the open pocket, noticing how full it feels, despite not holding anything essential. For a moment, they just sit there, breathing, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside, and the occasional cough or footstep from someone else waiting. They think about how far they still want to go. Not just tonight, but in general. How many miles they imagine are still ahead of them, and how tired they already feel, even before standing up. Without fully deciding to, they pull the backpack onto their lap and open the main compartment. The fabric makes a soft, tired sound, like it's been opened and closed too many times before. They take things out slowly, setting them beside them on the bench. The extra pair of shoes they packed just in case. A stack of papers they've been carrying from place to place without reading again. A small object they once kept for comfort, even though they can't remember the last time it actually helped. Each item makes a quiet thud as it touches the metal bench. The backpack grows lighter with every movement, though they don't notice it right away. What they notice instead is the hesitation that comes before putting anything down for good. What if they need it later? What if letting go now means being unprepared later? The thoughts rise quickly, almost automatically, like they've been trained to appear. They don't feel dramatic or emotional. They feel practical, responsible, sensible. They hold one item in their hands for a long moment, turning it over, feeling its familiar shape. It represents something they've been holding on to for a long time. Something that once made sense to keep. Back when the road felt less predictable. Back when they believed carrying more would make the journey easier. They place it back in the bag, then pause, then take it out again. This time they don't rush. They notice the tension in their jaw, the way their shoulders are slightly raised, even though they're sitting still. They notice how their breathing has been shallow, like their body expects to have to move at any second. Slowly, they set the item down on the bench beside them. Not with drama, not with relief, just with a quiet decision. It stays there unmoving, and nothing bad happens. They let out a breath they didn't realize they were holding. The backpack doesn't look much different, but when they lift it again, the weight has changed. It doesn't pull as hard. The straps feel less sharp against their palms. The difference is subtle, but it's there. They sit back and rest their hands on their thighs, eyes unfocused, letting the moment settle. The station remains the same. The night doesn't shift. The future doesn't suddenly become clear or easy. But something small has loosened. They realize that for a long time, they haven't been asking whether what they carry is still useful. They've only been asking whether it might be needed someday. And that question alone has been enough to keep everything with them mile after mile. The departure board flickers softly overhead. Somewhere a bus door closes. Time continues indifferent and steady, whether they are ready or not. They look down at the items, still resting on the bench beside them. And for the first time, they don't feel the urge to pick them all back up. They don't put everything back into the backpack right away. For a while, they just let the items sit there beside them, as if they belong to someone else now. The bench feels less crowded, and so does their body. Their knees are free, their shoulders have dropped a little, and the air around them seems to move more easily. It's strange how quickly the mind wants to step in and explain what just happened. It starts offering reasons, turning a simple moment into a story with meaning and lessons. But they don't follow it this time. They stay with the physical sensation instead, with the way their hands feel warmer now, with the way their breathing has slowed without being told to. They slip the backpack onto one shoulder, then the other. The straps settle without biting into the skin. It still has weight, still feels real, but it no longer demands their full attention. They roll their shoulders once, twice, noticing how the movement feels different than before. As they stand up, the station seems a little larger, or maybe it's just that they're taking it in without rushing. The fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. A janitor pushes a cart down the platform wheels, squeaking in a slow, patient rhythm. Somewhere a phone vibrates briefly, and then goes quiet again. They take a few steps, then stop, turning back to the bench. The items are still there exactly where they left them. No one has touched them. No one seems interested. The world hasn't noticed their small act of leaving something behind. That feels important, though they can't quite say why. For so long they've believed that if they don't hold on to everything, something will be lost forever. That memories will fade. That mistakes will repeat themselves. that they'll be caught unprepared when the road bends in an unexpected way. But standing there now, they realize that what they left behind wasn't a memory or a lesson. It was the weight of constantly revisiting it, of carrying it forward, even when it no longer changed anything. They walk toward the platform where their bus will arrive, their footsteps quieter than before. With each step, their mind tries to reach back, to check the past one more time, to scan the future for danger. The habit is still there. It hasn't disappeared. What has changed is how quickly they notice it. When a familiar worry surfaces, they don't argue with it. They don't try to replace it with a better thought. They simply see it like they saw the items on the bench and keep walking. The worry follows for a moment, then falls behind, unable to keep pace. They think about how often they've treated their thoughts like supplies, convinced that every concern might be useful later, that every fear might prevent a mistake. They've packed their mind the same way they packed their bag, filling every empty space until nothing could shift or breathe. But now, with a little room left inside, things move differently. A breeze slips through the station, cool and brief, lifting the edge of their jacket. It doesn't stay, but it doesn't need to. They feel it pass through and go, and something about that feels right. The bus arrives quietly, less dramatic than they expected. Doors open with a soft sigh. A small line forms, people stepping forward with tickets in hand, eyes half-lidded, each carrying their own version of weight. They join the line, not rushing, not checking their phone for the 5th time. The floor vibrates faintly beneath their shoes as the engine idles. The sound is steady, reliable, like a low hum that doesn't ask for attention. As they step onto the bus, they notice how easy it is to lift the backpack into the overhead rack. The movement surprises them. It's not effortless, but it's manageable, and that feels like enough. They take a seat by the window. The glass is cool against their temple as they lean their heads slightly to the side. Outside, the lights blur and stretch, turning the station into a soft pattern of motion and color. Their mind reaches out again, out of habit, searching for something to hold on to. A problem to solve. A plan to rehearse. Finding nothing urgent, it hesitates. In that pause, there is a quiet they don't often allow themselves to feel. Not the quiet of everything being perfect or resolved, but the quiet of not stirring the water just to see what will happen. They don't tell themselves to stop thinking. They don't promise to travel lighter from now on. They don't make a rule out of this moment. They simply sit, feeling the bus begin to move, feeling the road carry them forward, noticing how much easier it is to travel when they're no longer rearranging the weight in their mind every few seconds. The night stretches ahead, open and undecorated. And for once, that doesn't feel like something they need to fix. He stops on the bridge without meaning to. It isn't a scenic bridge, just a narrow wooden one tucked into a quiet city park that most people pass through without looking down. At this hour, the lamps along the path glow softly, not bright enough to wake anyone, just bright enough to remind the night where the edges are. The river moves beneath him with a steady, unhurried sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant. He rests his forearms on the railing and looks down, watching the water slide past the posts and stones without pausing. The surface catches pieces of light and lets them go again, carrying reflections away before they can settle. He tells himself he's only stopping for a moment. His walk was supposed to be short, just enough to loosen the stiffness from sitting too long during the day. But something about the sound of the water pulls him into stillness, the way a familiar song can stop you mid-step. His phone vibrates in his pocket. A notification. Maybe a message. Maybe nothing important. He doesn't check it. For once, the thought of opening another conversation, even a harmless one, feels heavier than standing here in the cool air. The river doesn't care that he's watching it. That thought arrives quietly, without judgment. The water doesn't slow down. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't look back to see what it just passed. He envies that more than he expects to. Lately, his mind has been busy with old scenes, moments that replay themselves without asking permission. Things he said too quickly. Things he didn't say at all. Choices that felt small at the time but seem enormous now when viewed from a distance. During the day, he manages well enough. He stays productive. He answers emails. He finishes what needs to be finished. But at night, when the noise thins out, the past steps closer, like it's been waiting patiently for its turn. He watches a leaf drift into view, caught in a slow swirl near the edge of the bank. For a second, it spins in place, circling the same patch of water before the current pulls it free and carries it on. His chest tightens slightly. That's how it feels, he thinks. Like circling the same memory, the same regret, convinced that if he looks at it from one more angle, something will finally change. He presses his palms against the railing, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his skin. It's rough in places, smooth in others, worn down by years of hands, doing exactly what he's doing now. He wonders how many people have stood here before him, leaning forward, lost in their own thoughts, each one believing their worries are uniquely heavy. The river keeps moving. He remembers a time when he believed that thinking harder was the same as fixing something. That if he could just understand the past well enough, replay it clearly enough, he could somehow reach back and adjust the outcome. But standing here now, watching the water pass under his feet, the idea feels thin, almost strange. He imagines trying to stop the river with his hands scooping water backward, forcing it upstream. The image is almost ridiculous. No matter how much effort he puts in, the water would slide through his fingers, unchanged by his struggle. A car passes somewhere nearby, tires whispering against wet pavement. The sound fades quickly, leaving the river alone again in the quiet. His breathing slows to match the rhythm below him. In, out. The water doesn't rush. It doesn't hesitate. A memory surfaces uninvited, one he knows well. His shoulders tense automatically, preparing to follow it down the familiar path of self-criticism and replay. This time, though, something interrupts the pattern. He looks back down at the river. The memory is still there, but now it feels less solid, like a reflection instead of a thing he can touch. It flickers, then shifts, distorted by movement. He doesn't push it away. He doesn't tell himself to stop thinking about it. He simply lets it sit where it is, without stepping fully into it. The moment stretches, gentle and unforced. He realizes that the river isn't teaching him anything new. It isn't offering advice or comfort. It's simply showing him what it has been doing all along, moving forward, without checking behind itself. He straightens slightly, rolling his shoulders back, feeling the tension ease just a little. The night air feels cooler, now cleaner. The past is still there. He knows that. It hasn't disappeared. But standing here listening to the water slip away beneath him, he understands something in his body that his mind has resisted for a long time. Nothing down there is waiting for him to pull it back. He stays on the bridge longer than he planned to, not because he's trying to understand anything, but because leaving feels unnecessary right now. The river continues its steady movement beneath him, unchanged by his attention, and that consistency becomes oddly comforting. For years he's treated his thoughts like responsibilities. Something to manage, something to review carefully so nothing important slips through unnoticed. Letting the past replay itself has felt productive even when it left him exhausted. At least he was doing something with it. Standing here, he begins to sense how much effort that has taken. Another memory rises, this one quieter, less sharp. It floats into awareness and then drifts, pulled along by the same current as the leaf before it. He watches it without following. The urge to step inside it appears for a moment, then fades when he doesn't feed it. He notices the space that remains. It isn't empty in a dramatic way. It's simply unoccupied. Like a chair no one is sitting in, or a room after someone has left, and close the door gently behind them. His phone vibrates again. This time he takes it out, glances at the screen and slides it back into his pocket without opening anything. The world doesn't react. Nothing collapses. The river doesn't slow. He smiles faintly at that. A breeze moves across the bridge, brushing his face and lifting the hair at the back of his neck. It's cool, but not cold. The kind of air that reminds you you're awake without asking you to do anything about it. He steps back from the railing and begins to walk his pace unhurried. Each footstep sounds clearer, now the wood responding with a soft, hollow knock beneath his shoes. The path curves away from the river, and after a few steps, he can no longer see the water directly, but he can still hear it. The sound follows him for a while, faint but present, like a reminder that movement doesn't stop just because he's no longer watching. That feels important too. As he walks, his mind reaches backward again out of habit. It checks for unfinished thoughts, unresolved scenes, moments that might need another look. When it finds them, they feel lighter than before, as if they've already begun to loosen. He doesn't push them away. He lets them walk alongside him for a few steps, then notices when they drift off. Attention caught by something else. A streetlight flickering. A cat darting across the path. The quiet rhythm of his own breathing. He realizes that overthinking hasn't disappeared. It's still there, ready to return whenever there's space for it. But it no longer feels like something he has to wrestle with. It feels more like a current he can choose not to swim against. There's a difference between remembering and living inside memory. He hasn't always known that. For a long time, he believed that if he stopped revisiting the past, it meant he didn't care enough. Now, walking away from the bridge, he understands that caring doesn't require constant return. The river has already taken those moments downstream. They exist, but they are no longer where he is standing. By the time he reaches the end of the path, the sounds of the city grow a little louder. A distant siren, a door closing, life continuing in its ordinary, unspectacular way. He pauses once more, not to look back, but to notice how his body feels. His chest is less tight. His jaw isn't clenched. His thoughts move more slowly, like they're no longer in a hurry to catch something before it gets away. The future doesn't feel clearer. He still doesn't have answers to everything he's been carrying. But the need to resolve it all right now has softened. He turns onto the sidewalk and continues home, steps, steady hands relaxed at his sides. Somewhere behind him, the river keeps moving, passing under bridges, around stones, through places no one will ever stop to watch. It doesn't remember where it has been, and it doesn't worry about where it's going next. It simply goes. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, he lets that be enough. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.